The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Buckingham Palace as Elon Musk stepped out of his black Tesla Model S. He had been invited to London for a private meeting with government officials about his latest space venture and electric vehicle expansion plans in the UK. The billionaire entrepreneur adjusted his dark suit jacket and walked toward the palace gates with his usual confident stride. As he approached the entrance, Musk noticed the iconic red-uniformed guards, standing at attention. These were the famous Queen's Guard, known worldwide for their stoic expressions and unwavering discipline. Their tall black bearskin hats and pristine red tunics made them look like living statues. Tourists constantly tried to get reactions from them, but the guards remained motionless, staring straight ahead with military precision. Musk paused for a moment, studying the nearest guard. The young soldier's face was completely expressionless, his rifle held perfectly upright, his polished black boots gleaming in the sunlight. Something about the scene triggered Musk's playful nature. He had always been someone who liked to test boundaries and push limits, whether in business or personal interactions. These guys are like robots, Musk thought to himself, a slight smirk forming on his lips. He had spent years working with actual robots at his various companies, and the comparison amused him. The guard's stillness was almost mechanical in its perfection. The tech mogul had always enjoyed being the center of attention. From his early days with PayPal to his current status as one of the world's richest men, he had grown accustomed to people responding to his presence. Whether it was employees jumping to fulfill his requests or world leaders seeking his advice on technology and innovation, Musk was used to getting immediate reactions from those around him. As he stood there, an idea began forming in his mind. He had read somewhere that these guards were trained never to break character, no matter what happened around them. But surely, he thought, someone of his stature and influence might be different. After all, he was Elon Musk, the man behind SpaceX, Tesla, and numerous other groundbreaking ventures. His companies had revolutionized multiple industries and made him a household name across the globe. The palace courtyard was relatively quiet at this early hour. A few tourists were scattered around, taking photos and admiring the architecture. Security cameras dotted the area, and plainclothes officers blended into the crowd. But Musk's attention remained focused on the stoic guard standing just a few feet away. He began walking closer to the guard, his expensive leather shoes clicking against the stone pavement. The sound echoed slightly in the morning air. As he approached, Musk could see the guard's face more clearly. Young, probably in his early 20s, with a clean-shaven jaw set in perfect military bearing. The soldier's eyes stared straight ahead, completely ignoring Musk's presence despite being one of the most recognizable faces in the world. This lack of acknowledgement only fueled Musk's growing impulse to test the situation. He was accustomed to people recognizing him, asking for selfies, or at least showing some sign that they knew who he was. The guard's complete indifference was both frustrating and intriguing. Musk stopped directly in front of the guard, close enough to see the fine details of the red uniform and the intricate brass buttons that ran down the front of the tunic. The fabric looked impeccably maintained, not a single thread out of place. Everything about the guard's appearance spoke of discipline, tradition, and unwavering professionalism. Impressive dedication, Musk murmured under his breath, but loud enough that the guard would have heard him if he had been listening. Still no reaction, not even a flicker of the eyes or a slight movement of the lips. It was as if Musk didn't exist in the guard's world. The billionaire's competitive nature began to kick in. Throughout his career, he had built his reputation on achieving the impossible and breaking through barriers that others considered insurmountable. He had revolutionized online payments, made electric cars mainstream, and was actively working to make humans a multi-planetary species. Surely getting a simple acknowledgement from a palace guard couldn't be that difficult. He took another step closer, now standing less than 3 feet from the soldier. From this distance, he could see the guard's steady breathing and notice how the morning light reflected off the polished surface of his rifle. Every detail of the uniform was perfect, from the precise positioning of the white belt to the exact angle of the bearskin hat. Musk's mind began racing with possibilities. He could try talking to the guard, maybe mention who he was and what he had accomplished. Or perhaps he could test the boundaries of the guard's training by doing something unexpected. The more he thought about it, the more determined he became to get some kind of response. The entrepreneur had always been someone who pushed boundaries, whether in technology, business, or social situations. His Twitter posts regularly made headlines, and his unconventional approach to corporate leadership had become legendary. This situation with the guard felt like another puzzle to solve, another challenge to overcome. As he stood there contemplating his next move, Musk felt a familiar surge of confidence. He was used to getting what he wanted through a combination of charm, influence, and sheer persistence. The guard's stoic demeanor was impressive, but Musk was convinced that everyone had their breaking point. He just needed to find the right approach to crack through the soldier's professional facade. Musk decided to start with a casual approach. He cleared his throat softly and spoke in a friendly tone. "Good morning, soldier. Beautiful day, isn't it?" The words hung in the air for several seconds, but the guard remained completely motionless. Not even a twitch of acknowledgement crossed his face. Undeterred, Musk tried again, this time with a bit more authority in his voice. "I'm Elon Musk. You might have heard of me. Tesla? SpaceX?" He waited expectantly, watching for any sign of recognition. The guard's expression remained unchanged, his gaze fixed on some invisible point in the distance. It was as if Musk was speaking to a statue rather than a living person. A small crowd of tourists had begun to gather, noticing the billionaire's interaction with the guard. Some recognized Musk and started whispering excitedly among themselves, pulling out their phones to record what was happening. The attention only encouraged Musk further. He had always enjoyed being in the spotlight, and this situation was quickly becoming a public spectacle. "You know, I've worked with some pretty advanced AI systems," Musk continued, speaking a bit louder now so the growing audience could hear. "But your programming is truly impressive." He chuckled at his own joke, expecting at least a slight reaction to what was obviously meant to be humorous. Still nothing. The guard continued staring straight ahead with the same unwavering focus he had maintained since Musk's arrival. The lack of response was beginning to genuinely puzzle Musk. Throughout his life, he had rarely encountered someone who was completely immune to his charm and influence. Business rivals, government officials, even critics usually showed some reaction when he engaged with them directly. This guard's complete indifference was unlike anything he had experienced before. Musk began walking slowly around the guard, examining him from different angles like he was studying a particularly interesting piece of technology. "The attention to detail is remarkable," he said, addressing both the guard and the watching crowd. "Every aspect of your uniform, your posture, your expression, it's all perfectly calibrated." He stopped directly in front of the soldier again and leaned in slightly closer. "But I have to wonder, what would it take to get even the smallest reaction? A blink, a smile, maybe just a slight nod of acknowledgement?" The guard's breathing remained steady and controlled, his face showing no sign that he had heard a single word. The growing crowd was becoming more animated, with people pointing and taking photos. Some tourists were laughing at Musk's increasingly dramatic attempts to get the guard's attention. Others looked slightly uncomfortable, sensing that something was about to escalate beyond normal tourist behavior. Musk straightened his tie and took a deep breath. His competitive instincts were now fully engaged. This had stopped being a casual interaction and had become a personal challenge. He was Elon Musk, one of the most influential people in the world. Surely he could find a way to break through this soldier's professional facade. "Listen," Musk said, his tone becoming more serious. "I'm not just any tourist here. I'm here on important business with your government. I employ thousands of people across multiple industries. My companies are literally helping to save the planet and expand human civilization to Mars." He paused, waiting for some sign that his words had made an impact. The silence continued. The billionaire's frustration was starting to show, though he tried to mask it with humor. "You know, in my companies, when someone doesn't respond to direct communication, we usually check if there's a software malfunction." A few people in the crowd chuckled, but the guard remained unmoved. Musk began pacing back and forth in front of the soldier, his mind working through different strategies. He had built his career on solving complex problems and overcoming seemingly impossible obstacles. This situation was just another puzzle that required the right approach to crack. "Maybe you're not impressed by business achievements," Musk mused, aloud. "How about this? I'm working to make life multiplanetary. Humans on Mars within the next decade. That's got to be worth at least a raised eyebrow, right?" He studied the guard's face intently, looking for any micro-expression that might indicate his words were having an effect. The soldier's discipline was genuinely impressive, Musk had to admit. He had encountered many people with strong self-control in his business dealings, but this level of unwavering focus was exceptional. It reminded him of the precision and reliability he demanded from his rockets and electric vehicles. No margin for error, no deviation from the programmed response. As the minutes passed, Musk found himself becoming genuinely curious about what it would take to break through the guard's training. It had become less about ego and more about understanding the limits of human discipline. How much pressure could someone withstand before their natural human responses overcame their professional conditioning? The crowd around them had grown larger, and Musk could hear people speculating about what he might do next. Some were encouraging him to keep trying, while others suggested he should leave the guard alone. The attention was energizing, feeding Musk's natural showmanship and desire to entertain. "All right," Musk announced to both the guard and the audience. "Let's try a different approach." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his smartphone. "Maybe you'd be interested in seeing some footage from our latest SpaceX launch? The Falcon Heavy putting a satellite into orbit?" He held the phone up toward the guard's face, displaying a video of a rocket launch in progress. The guard's eyes remained fixed on their original focal point, completely ignoring the screen just inches from his face. Even as the sound of rocket engines filled the air around them, his expression never wavered. The display of technological achievement that had amazed millions of viewers around the world might as well have been invisible to this soldier. Musk lowered his phone, a new level of respect beginning to form for the guard's unwavering dedication. But along with that respect came an even stronger determination to find the key that would unlock some form of human response from this living statue. The situation had reached a tipping point in Musk's mind. What had started as casual curiosity had transformed into something much more personal. The billionaire entrepreneur was not accustomed to being ignored, especially not so completely and publicly. His wealth, influence, and global recognition had always opened doors and commanded attention wherever he went. Musk looked around at the growing crowd of onlookers, many of whom were now filming the interaction with their smartphones. He could see the mixture of amusement and anticipation on their faces. They were waiting to see what the famous tech mogul would do next, and Musk felt the familiar pressure to deliver something memorable. "You know what?" Musk said, his voice taking on a more commanding tone. "I think it's time we established some proper protocol here." He straightened his shoulders and adopted what he considered to be a more authoritative posture. The crowd sensed the shift in energy and grew quieter, straining to hear what would happen next. Musk had always been someone who believed in the power of hierarchy and respect for achievement. In his companies, employees recognized his authority and responded to his directives with immediate action. Board members and government officials sought his opinions and treated his words with considerable weight. The idea that this young soldier was completely dismissing his presence felt like a fundamental violation of the natural order as Musk understood it. "Soldier!" Musk called out in a firm, clear voice that carried across the courtyard. "I am ordering you to acknowledge my presence." The words seemed to echo off the palace walls, and several tourists gasped at the boldness of the statement. The guard, however, remained as motionless as ever, his breathing steady and his gaze unwavering. The lack of response only fueled Musk's determination. He had spent years in positions of authority, making decisions that affected thousands of employees and billions of dollars in investments. His word carried weight in boardrooms across Silicon Valley and beyond. The concept that someone would simply ignore a direct order from him was both foreign and infuriating. "I'm not asking for conversation," Musk continued, his voice growing, louder and more insistent. "Just basic military courtesy. A simple salute would suffice." He gestured toward the guard's rifle as if indicating the proper form the acknowledgement should take. "Surely your training includes showing respect to visiting dignitaries and business leaders." The crowd was now completely silent, sensing that they were witnessing something significant. Phones were held high, capturing every word and gesture. Some tourists looked uncomfortable with the escalating tension, while others seemed thrilled to be witnessing what might become a viral moment featuring one of the world's most famous entrepreneurs. Musk took another step closer to the guard, now standing close enough to see individual threads in the red uniform fabric. "Look, I understand you have your duties and protocols," he said, his tone mixing authority with what he thought was reasonable negotiation. "But I'm here on official business with your government. I employ British citizens. I pay taxes that contribute to your salary." Still no response. The guard's face remained perfectly neutral, his eyes focused on that same invisible point in the distance. His hands maintained their exact grip on his rifle, and his posture showed no sign of tension or reaction to Musk's increasingly direct approach. The billionaire's frustration was becoming more visible now. His usual charm and casual confidence were giving way to something more demanding and expectant. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "I've had meetings with presidents and prime ministers. I've been personally thanked by NASA administrators and European Space Agency directors." He began listing his achievements as if they were credentials that should automatically command respect. "My companies have revolutionized transportation, space exploration, and sustainable energy. Tesla alone has prevented millions of tons of carbon emissions. SpaceX has successfully landed rockets and resumed human spaceflight from American soil." The guard's discipline remained absolute. Not a single word or accomplishment seemed to register in his consciousness. His training had clearly prepared him for exactly this type of situation, and he was executing that training flawlessly. The sight of his unwavering composure was actually quite impressive from a professional standpoint, though Musk was far too frustrated to appreciate it at the moment. "Fine," Musk declared, his patience finally wearing thin. "If polite requests and reasonable explanations won't work, then perhaps we need to be more direct about this." He planted himself directly in the guard's line of sight, close enough that the soldier would have to look through him to maintain his fixed gaze. The crowd held its collective breath, sensing that Musk was about to cross some kind of line. Several people began recording more intently, realizing they might be witnessing a moment that would make international news. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting sharper shadows and making the red of the guard's uniform seem even more vivid against the gray stone of the palace. Musk raised his right hand and pointed directly at the guard with an authoritative gesture that he had perfected in countless business presentations and public appearances. "I am giving you a direct order," he announced in his most commanding voice. "As someone who contributes significantly to your country's economy and technological advancement, I am ordering you to show proper respect and salute me immediately." The words hung in the morning air like a challenge thrown down between two opposing forces. On one side stood Elon Musk, representing modern entrepreneurial success, technological innovation, and the kind of influence that money and achievement could buy. On the other side stood a young soldier, representing centuries of military tradition, disciplined service, and unwavering duty to something larger than any individual personality or fortune. The tension in the courtyard was now palpable. Musk stood with his hand still pointed at the guard, waiting for some kind of response to what he clearly considered a reasonable demand. The crowd had grown to nearly 50 people, all watching, with fascination as one of the world's richest men engaged in what was essentially a battle of wills with a palace guard. For several long seconds, nothing happened. The guard maintained his perfect military bearing, his eyes still fixed on that distant point, his expression showing no indication that he had heard Musk's order at all. The silence stretched on, broken only by the soft clicking of camera phones and the distant sounds of London traffic beyond the palace walls. Then, almost imperceptibly, something changed. A new figure appeared at the edge of the courtyard, moving, with purposeful strides toward the developing confrontation. This was Sergeant Major Harrison, a 30-year veteran of the British Army with more ribbons on his chest than most people see in a lifetime of military museums. Harrison was not a tall man, but his presence commanded immediate attention. His uniform was even more immaculate than the guards, if such a thing were possible. Every crease was razor-sharp, every button gleamed with perfect polish. His face bore the weathered look of someone who had served in multiple conflicts and had seen enough of the world to be impressed by very little. As he approached, Harrison's experienced eyes quickly assessed the situation. He had dealt with countless tourists over the years who had tried various antics to get reactions from his guards. Politicians, celebrities, and wealthy businessmen had all attempted to use their status to break through military protocol. But this situation was different, more public, more aggressive, and potentially more damaging to both the palace's reputation and the guard's career. Musk noticed the approaching figure but initially dismissed him as just another palace employee. He was still focused on the original guard, convinced that persistence would eventually break through the soldier's training. "I'm waiting for that salute, soldier," Musk called out again, his voice carrying a tone of growing impatience. Sergeant Major Harrison came to a stop about 10 feet from the confrontation, his position carefully chosen to be close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough to observe the full situation. He had heard Musk's demand and had seen enough to understand exactly what was happening. His expression remained neutral, but those who knew military bearing could see the subtle signs of controlled displeasure in his posture. The crowd had noticed the new arrival, and several people began whispering excitedly. Someone in the back called out, "That's a sergeant major!" The comment rippled through the group, and even those unfamiliar with military ranks could sense that someone with significant authority had entered the scene. Musk finally turned his attention to Harrison, immediately recognizing that this was someone with more influence than the regular guard. His businessman's instincts told him that this might be the person he needed to address to resolve the situation in his favor. "Ah, perfect," Musk said, turning toward Harrison with renewed confidence. "Perhaps you can explain to your man here the proper way to treat visiting dignitaries." Harrison remained silent for a moment, studying Musk with the same careful attention he might give to assessing a tactical situation. His experienced eyes took in everything: Musk's expensive suit, his confident posture, the expectant look on his face that suggested he was accustomed to getting his way in most situations. "Good morning, sir," Harrison finally spoke, his voice carrying the crisp authority of decades of military leadership. "I am Sergeant Major Harrison. I understand there seems to be some confusion about military protocol here." Musk smiled, interpreting this as an opportunity to state his case to someone who clearly had the authority to resolve the situation. "Yes, exactly. I've been trying to explain to your guard that I'm here on official business. I'm Elon Musk, Tesla, SpaceX. You've probably heard of my work. I simply requested appropriate acknowledgement of my presence, but your soldier here seems to be malfunctioning." The choice of words was telling. Even in this moment, Musk couldn't resist framing the situation in technological terms, comparing the highly trained soldier to one of his machines that wasn't performing as expected. It revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of what he was dealing with. Harrison's expression didn't change, but something subtle shifted in his eyes. The comparison of one of his elite guards to a malfunctioning machine had registered, and not favorably. "I see," Harrison replied in the same measured tone. "And you believe that your business achievements entitle you to modify established military protocol?" Musk caught the slight edge in Harrison's voice, but misinterpreted it as an invitation to further explain his position. "Well, yes, frankly. I mean, let's be realistic here. My companies have contributed billions to the global economy. I'm working on projects that will literally save humanity. Sustainable energy, space colonization, advanced AI development. Surely that warrants basic courtesy from public servants." The crowd was hanging on every word now, sensing that this exchange was building toward something significant. Several people had their phones trained on both men, documenting what was clearly becoming a clash between two very different worldviews. Harrison nodded slowly, as if carefully considering Musk's argument. "I understand your perspective, Mr. Musk," he said with the same professional courtesy he might show to any civilian. "However, I believe there may be some fundamental misunderstandings about how military protocol functions, particularly regarding the Queen's Guard." Musk waved his hand dismissively. "Look, I'm not trying to cause problems here. I just want what any person of my stature would reasonably expect. Simple acknowledgement. A salute would be appropriate. I've received them from military personnel, in other countries when I've visited government facilities or met with defense officials." This statement revealed another layer of Musk's misunderstanding. He was conflating ceremonial visits with official government business, assuming that his wealth and business success automatically entitled him to military honors regardless of context or protocol. Harrison's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. In his 3 decades of service, he had learned to recognize entitled behavior when he saw it, and this was a textbook case. But his response would be measured, professional, and absolutely devastating in its precision. Sergeant Major Harrison took a single step forward, his movement precise and deliberate. When he spoke, his voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone who had commanded respect on battlefields across multiple continents. Every word was measured, clear, and delivered with the kind of quiet power that made people instinctively stand straighter. "Mr. Musk," Harrison began, his tone remaining professionally courteous, but with an underlying steel that hadn't been there before. "I believe you may have some misconceptions about military protocol, the role of the Queen's Guard, and what constitutes appropriate behavior in this setting." The crowd fell completely silent. Even the background noise of the city seemed to fade as everyone strained to hear what the sergeant major would say next. Musk, still confident in his position, crossed his arms and waited for what he assumed would be an explanation followed by the accommodation he had been seeking. "These guards," Harrison continued, gesturing toward the soldier who had remained perfectly motionless throughout the entire exchange, "are not here for your entertainment, acknowledgement, or to validate your sense of importance. They are serving members of Her Majesty's military, carrying out ceremonial duties that represent centuries of British tradition and honor." Harrison's words carried weight that went far beyond their literal meaning. His tone made it clear that he was not merely explaining policy, but defending something sacred that Musk had inadvertently insulted through his behavior and demands. "Furthermore," the sergeant major continued, his voice growing slightly sharper, "military salutes are not given on demand to civilians, regardless of their wealth, fame, or self-perceived status. Salutes are rendered between military personnel according to established protocol or to specific government officials in their official capacity during formal ceremonies." Musk's confident expression began to waver slightly as he realized this was not going in the direction he had anticipated. The sergeant major's words were delivered with such authority and precision that they began to highlight how inappropriate his demands had been from the very beginning. "The young guardsman you have been harassing," Harrison said, using the word harassing with deliberate emphasis, "has been conducting himself with exemplary discipline and professionalism. He has followed his training exactly as he should, maintaining the dignity and standards expected of the Queen's Guard despite considerable provocation." The word harassing hit Musk like a physical blow. In all his years of business dealings and public appearances, he had rarely been characterized so bluntly and negatively by someone in a position of clear authority. The sergeant major wasn't intimidated by his wealth or fame and wasn't interested in diplomatic language to spare his feelings. Harrison continued his precise dismantling of Musk's position. "You seem to believe that your business achievements grant you some special status that supersedes military protocol and British law. Let me be absolutely clear, they do not. Your wealth does not entitle you to command salutes from soldiers. Your fame does not give you the right to demand acknowledgement from guards performing their duties." The crowd was watching this exchange with fascination. Many had pulled out their phones to record what was clearly becoming a masterclass in professional authority. Harrison's calm, measured delivery made his words even more devastating than if he had shouted or shown anger. "Moreover," the sergeant major pressed on, "your comparison of this highly trained soldier to a malfunctioning machine demonstrates a fundamental disrespect for military service that I find particularly troubling. These men and women have volunteered to serve their country, often at great personal sacrifice. They deserve considerably better treatment than what you have shown here today." Musk opened his mouth to respond, perhaps to defend his position or explain his intentions, but Harrison continued speaking with the inexorable force of someone who had not finished making his point. "In my 30 years of military service, I have met with presidents, prime ministers, royalty, and countless other individuals who might consider themselves important. Without exception, those who truly deserve respect have understood and appreciated military protocol rather than demanding exceptions to it." The implication was crystal clear without Harrison having to state it directly. Musk's behavior had marked him as someone who did not truly understand or deserve the respect he was demanding. The sergeant major had managed to completely invert the power dynamic of the situation through nothing more than quiet, professional authority and unshakable principle. The proper response when you encounter guards performing their ceremonial duties, Harrison concluded, is to observe quietly and respectfully, perhaps take a photograph if appropriate, and then continue on your way. What is not appropriate is demanding acknowledgement, issuing orders to soldiers who do not serve under your command, and disrupting their duties for your own gratification. The silence that followed was deafening. Musk stood there, his earlier confidence completely deflated, realizing that he had not only failed to get what he wanted, but had been thoroughly and publicly educated about why his demands were inappropriate in the first place. The crowd began to shift uncomfortably, sensing that they had witnessed something that went far beyond entertainment. This had been a real clash between two very different value systems, and there was no question about which one had prevailed. Harrison's final words carried the weight of absolute finality. "I suggest, Mr. Musk, that you show proper respect for these guards by allowing them to continue their duties without further interruption, and perhaps take some time to reflect on the difference between earning respect through character and demanding it through status." The aftermath of Sergeant Major Harrison's words hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Musk stood frozen for several long moments, his usual quick wit and ready responses completely absent. For perhaps the first time in decades, he found himself genuinely speechless, not because he couldn't think of anything to say, but because he was beginning to understand just how badly he had misjudged the entire situation. The crowd around them had grown larger during the confrontation, but now people were beginning to disperse, sensing that the main event had concluded. Many continued recording with their phones, capturing Musk's obvious discomfort and the sergeant major's unwavering professional composure. The footage would undoubtedly make its way to social media within hours, creating a very different kind a viral moment than Musk had probably envisioned. Harrison remained at attention, his eyes fixed on Musk with the same steady gaze that had commanded respect on military bases around the world. He wasn't gloating or showing any satisfaction at having delivered such a thorough correction. This was simply a professional soldier doing his job, which in this case meant protecting the dignity and honor of the guards under his authority. Musk's face had gone through several shades of emotion during Harrison's speech: surprise, indignation, embarrassment, and finally something approaching genuine reflection. The billionaire was many things, but he wasn't entirely without the capacity for self-awareness when confronted with undeniable truth delivered with such precision and authority. Musk began, then stopped. His usual confident demeanor had completely evaporated, replaced by the uncomfortable realization that he had made a serious error in judgment. The sergeant major's words had stripped away all of his justifications and exposed the fundamental selfishness of his demands. The young guard who had started this entire incident continued standing at perfect attention, his discipline never wavering, despite having been the center of an increasingly dramatic confrontation. His steadfast professionalism throughout the ordeal had been vindicated completely by his sergeant major's intervention. He had done exactly what his training required, and his superior officer had publicly acknowledged and defended that dedication. Harrison nodded slightly, recognizing that his words had achieved their intended effect. "The guards will continue their duties now, Mr. Musk," he said in a tone that made it clear the conversation was over. "I believe you have a meeting to attend inside the palace." The reminder of his original purpose for being there hit Musk like a splash of cold water. He had completely forgotten about the government officials waiting for him, the important business discussions that had brought him to London in the first place. Instead, he had allowed his ego to turn a simple walk past some guards into a public embarrassment that would likely follow him for years to come. Musk looked around at the remaining crowd members, many of whom were still recording and taking photos. He could see the mixture of amusement, disapproval, and second-hand embarrassment on their faces. Some tourists were shaking their heads in disappointment, having witnessed someone they had probably admired acting in a way that contradicted the innovative and forward-thinking image he had cultivated. "Right," Musk finally managed to say, his voice much quieter than it had been during his earlier demands. "Yes, the meeting." He straightened his jacket and attempted to regain some semblance of his usual composure, but the damage was done. His attempt to command respect through status and wealth had backfired spectacularly. As he began walking toward the palace entrance, Musk couldn't help but glance back at the guard one more time. The soldier remained exactly as he had been when this whole incident began, perfectly still, perfectly professional, completely focused on his duty. The contrast between the guard's unwavering character and his own petulant behavior was impossible to ignore. Harrison watched Musk's retreat with the same professional attention he had shown throughout the encounter. He would file a report about the incident later, but for now, his priority was ensuring that his guards could continue their duties without further disruption. The sergeant major's intervention had been textbook perfect, firm, clear, and absolutely decisive. The remaining tourists began to disperse more quickly now, many of them already posting videos and photos to social media with captions that would not be flattering to Musk's reputation. The story would spread rapidly across the internet, becoming another cautionary tale about the dangers of letting success go to one's head. Inside the palace, government officials were still waiting for their meeting with the famous entrepreneur. They had no idea that their guest had just experienced one of the most humbling moments of his professional life just outside their doors. Musk would have to somehow shift his mindset from the embarrassment of his encounter with military discipline to the complex business discussions that lay ahead. As he disappeared through the palace entrance, the courtyard gradually returned to its normal rhythm. The guard who had endured the entire confrontation with such remarkable composure finally allowed himself the smallest of exhales, though his posture remained perfect. His training had been tested in front of dozens of witnesses and international attention, and he had passed with flying colors. Sergeant Major Harrison remained for a few more minutes, ensuring that order was fully restored and that his guards could resume their duties without lingering disruption. He exchanged a brief, almost imperceptible nod with the young guardsman, a moment of professional acknowledgement between soldiers that spoke volumes about mutual respect and shared understanding of duty. The story of Musk's encounter would indeed spread rapidly across social media platforms within hours. Videos from multiple angles captured the entire exchange, from his initial confident demands to his final deflated retreat into the palace. News outlets would pick up the story by evening, with headlines focusing on the billionaire's public humiliation and the sergeant major's masterful handling of the situation. Inside the palace, Musk struggled to regain his composure for the important meetings ahead. The government officials he was scheduled to meet had no knowledge of what had just transpired outside, but Musk found it difficult to focus on discussions about electric vehicle infrastructure and space technology partnerships. The sergeant major's words continued to echo in his mind, forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths about his own behavior and assumptions. The incident would become a defining moment in how the public perceived Musk's character. While his technological achievements remained impressive, this very public display of entitlement and subsequent correction would follow him for years. It served as a stark reminder that true respect cannot be demanded or purchased. It must be earned through actions, character, and genuine regard for others. For the Queen's Guard, it was simply another day of professional service, though one that had tested their training in an unusually public way. Their unwavering dedication to duty, even under pressure from one of the world's most famous individuals, demonstrated the kind of character and discipline that truly commands respect. The morning sun continued to shine on Buckingham Palace, illuminating the red uniforms of the guards who stood their posts with the same quiet dignity they had maintained for centuries. Some traditions, they had proven once again, are far more valuable than any individual's wealth or fame.